Who is Brett Keane? Well, he's a man who lives in the state of Missouri. He's a man who has been found guilty of many things in his lifetime of trying to become a successful YouTuber. Brett Keane is a bad person. He is also an obscure figure amongst the most well-known, infamous internet personalities known only as lolcows. What is a lolcow? Well, ladies and gentlemen, a lolcow is a target of some form of harassment. Someone who takes their bad life choices and turns that into internet content. From a speed eater turned alcoholic, shoe nice, Christian, who is known as the author and creator of a terrible Sonic the Hedgehog ripoff called Sonichu. Also, this person had sex with their own mother, and they went to jail for it. And finally, we have everyone's favorite punching bag, Wings of Redemption, a man who is made fun of for being overweight, and he is also harassed for his angry temper whenever Wings loses at games or life. Out of all of these people, who out here has ever heard of the manatee, Brett Keane? Let's go back to the early days of YouTube, 2006. Two communities are at each other's throats. The religious community, made up of God believers, versus the atheists, who are in strong disagreement with the idea of God existing. One such content creator existed in these old communities of atheist YouTubers, Brett Keane, an atheist whose content revolved around debunking religious talking points. Brett spent many years on YouTube as an atheist content creator, but suddenly Brett changed from an outspoken atheist into a God believer. Allegedly, Brett only changed his worldview because he was receiving donations from religious folk.
His conversion story is beautiful too. His family was in financial distress, so he took a walk, and he's like, man, I should e-beg. So then he e-begged, and people gave him money, and he's like, God exists.
Well, he said that they were mostly Christians that were donating money to him.
So he e-begged, and Christians gave him the most money. There
and
you
he's
go.
Like, I need to be a Christian.
He's
now.
just loyal to whoever. If it was Muslims, it would have been, he'd be, Muslim. If it was Buddhist, he would have been Buddhist. Whatever.
Brett Keane is not a good person. He has 2 restraining orders filed against him. One restraining order was filed by his own mother, who allegedly claims that Brett beat her up. From Brett's retelling of how he received this domestic abuse charge, his mother wanted Brett to go to church, and Brett didn't want to go to church, so she kicked him out for not being a God believer. The second restraining order was filed by his wife, who allegedly got into a domestic dispute with Brett, not wanting to see his face because it would remind her of their daughter who was in the hospital at the time. Brett is a vengeful and bitter man. Back in the early days of YouTube, Brett abused the flagging system for his own ways.
I was suspended for a couple weeks, and I'm not going to sit around with my thumb in my ass and wait for that shit to fix, because we all know that YouTube isn't going to fix it. So what I'm going to do for you, Coughlin and Napalm, is I'm going to use YouTube as a weapon, just as you've used it on several of my accounts, taking away my freedom of speech. Let me show you how this works. And don't cross your fingers or get your hopes up that YouTube's actually going to look at your videos and try to figure out if they actually violate terms of service or not, because we both know that all your videos violate terms of service.
Another one of Brett's bad behaviors was Brett's acts of plagiarism. Brett would post lyrics online and claim it as his own idea, but when Brett's ideas were cross-referenced, similarities were found to a song by the band Him that resembled the same lyrics that Brett had written. Brett has been accused of doxing, of false flagging other people's content. For many years, from 2006 to 2014, Brett floated in obscurity. Brett wrote a book that in time has now become a made fun of book, Brett's book is no longer on sale, so if you want to experience this book, you'll have to go hunting for audio readings online. The book is allegedly riddled with lots of grammar mistakes. It wouldn't be until 2014 that Brett would appear on a podcast that would make him relevant again. The name of that podcast was called the Drunken Peasants Podcast, originally hosted by the Amazing Atheist. In 2014, Brett brought over a gang of loud and obnoxious people to debate the Amazing Atheist on the topic of religion. Due to the reception that this podcast had garnered, Brett was brought back for another podcast. Brett would bring in a posse of religious fanatics who would speak on Brett's behalf. Brett would just sit there in the background while other people spoke for him. Due to this strategy of debating, Brett was banned from the Drunken Peasants podcast. There was also some terrible behind-the-scenes behavior that Brett was exhibiting.
Don't say anything. Don't mention a word.
We did not say that.
What did we say?
He's claiming that we were like, hey, Brett Keane, don't tell anyone that you're going to be on the next show. Don't tell anyone. We want it to be a secret.
A secret?
Yeah, I don't know what the fuck he's
When did we
talking
say
about.
that?
I do not know.
I never said it. Did you say it? Maybe Scotty said it.
I don't know.
We want it all to be a surprise and everything for next week.
Oh, you know what? He was like, well, if you don't want me to be on tonight, do you at least want to bring me on at the end of the show?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. We didn't want to bring him on to announce
all.
it. So
maybe we said, well, it should be a surprise. I don't know. Fuck Brett Keane. I do not want him on anymore. So I'm going to put him up here. Here's the Skype conversation. I took some screenshots of it. You can see I messaged him around 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, basically saying, as we've stated before, we started the Drunken Peasants to move away from theism, atheism debates. We did enjoy, having the debates, but, that's not the purpose of our show. But in light of the video that we just listened to, your bullshit, talking shit, I don't want to have you on anymore. I don't even want to acknowledge your existence, which I'm going against today, admittingly.
Due to the popularity of the debates that Brett starred in, Brett had turned into a diva. So now that Brett was still a problematic person, the Drunken Peasants still watched Brett's content, but would not invite him back to the podcast due to his immature behavior. Now, Brett was the podcast's Lolcow, with only his content being used as fodder for the Drunken Peasants to make fun of. Brett was made fun of mostly for his speech patterns and mispronunciation of certain words.
He's constantly asking, why is it whenever you read the Quran or you read the Torah or the
read the
Bible,
Quran?
Why is
It sounded like he said fucking Quran, dude.
Read
not
the Quran.
Not the Quran.
This one
The
says
Quran.
blue. This one says red.
It also says Crayola.
First, let's take a look at who this man is. He was one of the first notable atheists on YouTube. He likes to think of himself as some kind of intellectual, though he constantly makes grammatical errors and misuses or mispronounces words. I'll give a couple quick examples. He often says, I seen this, or I seen that a while back. He says the word whenever, though he really just means when, and he says counterdict instead of contradict.
Now eventually Brett was brought back on the Drunken Peasants podcast after a year due to his content still being used as a joke on the podcast. Episode 166 of the Drunken Peasants was a landmark episode for Brett Keane. Being brought out of the shadows of obscurity, Brett was put on trial for his bad actions of false flagging, DMCAing, and Brett had made several allegations against the YouTuber The Amazing Atheist. Brett was also proven to be a plagiarist, and any credibility that Brett thought he had went out the window completely with this podcast episode. The biggest meme that has spawned out of Brett's association with this podcast was that Brett bared an uncanny resemblance to a manatee. Unlike the previous two podcasts that featured Brett Keane, Brett actually spoke for himself, much to his detriment. After this notorious episode of the Drunken Peasants podcast, Brett had now become a clown-like figure amongst the audience of the Drunken Peasants. Unfortunately, Brett Keane is his own worst enemy, so even though the Drunken Peasants did provide Brett the most exposure to his content, Brett does not treat the Drunken Peasants with any kindness whatsoever. Brett would make video after video saying awful things about the podcast, mainly the host of the podcast, The Amazing Atheist. Brett would even make threats of suing the Drunken Peasants in his videos. Brett Keane also attempted to accuse The Amazing Atheist of being a silent G grapist with little to no evidence.
So this is a 4.5 minute clip from a recent Brett Keane hangout, and someone joins the call and tells an interesting story regarding TJ.
Oh, wow.
Here it is.
I'm Dean Bryan. I'm from Louisiana. Then he dropped out, but there was a rumor that he dropped out because he raped somebody.
Damn, really?
Yeah, apparently he raped someone at the high school, but I don't know who it is, but
I have no evidence, but apparently that happened.
That's what we're supposed to believe. Somebody called up Brett Keane's hangout on the whim, just discovered Brett Keane within the last couple of days. I just found out about you. You heard him at the beginning. And just happens to want to feed Brett Keane a bunch of negative information about you. Brett, this is so fucking transparently concocted by you that it's sad that it even exists. It's super fucking sad that this exists.
I mean, they're right about me being a rapist, though. I mean, I have raped.
Okay, literally.
Finally, the straw that broke the camel's back came in the form of Brett attempting to actually harm the Drunken Peasants in real life. This saga of horrible actions goes as follows. The Drunken Peasants podcast was no stranger to garnering enemies, so someone like Joseph Martelli, a devout Christian content creator, came as no surprise that he would be an enemy of the podcast. A podcast filled with 4 stoner atheists. Unfortunately, Joseph's actions were much different than any previous Drunken Peasants antagonist. Joseph had decided to actually make an appearance at a Drunken Peasants meetup, with vague threats attached to his appearance. But unlike the threats that Joseph Martelli made, Joseph could not stand tall or back up his threats. He appeared at a Drunken Peasants meetup to only run away when the fans of that meetup confronted him. Now, where does Brett Keane fit into this story? Well, you see, in the weeks leading up to Joseph Martelli's appearance, Brett was actually egging on Joseph into showing up to the podcast meetup. Brett was also hosting Google Hangouts with Joseph Martelli in them, talking to Joseph. And finally, the previously mentioned straw that broke the camel's back. Brett had given Joseph Martelli the Drunken Peasants studio address in an attempt to actually harm and or delete the Drunken Peasants. Brett was hoping to take advantage of a mentally unstable man in order to get back at a podcast that was simply making fun of him. Sick of his negative influence, the Drunken Peasants would no longer associate with Brett in any way. This meant no more watching, thinking, or even mentioning Brett. Because of this ban, Brett would soon fade into obscurity once again. Where is Brett Keane now? Well, ever since Brett Keane was banned from being shown on the Drunken Peasants podcast, Brett has still made regular content since then, but as of the making of this video, Brett has become an obscure enough figure to finally end this documentary. Brett has not uploaded any videos, and no longer does he have an online presence anymore. If I could end this video on any solid words of wisdom, it would be these words. No matter how bad your life is, think about this. Brett Keane is a man who is hated by many people. Brett has been accused of allegedly beating his wife. and his own mother. Brett also has a book that has been made fun of by more people than have bought the book. And finally, the icing on the cake, Brett Keane has no real teeth, and he has to use dentures, like an old man. So no matter how hard your life can get, just think about this. At least you're not Brett Keane. It can always be worse. Good night, folks.
Got a #1 victory royale. Yeah, Fortnite, we bout to get down. 10 kills on the board right now. Just wiped out Tomato Town.